Chapter 1: A Strange Encounter. It was an ordinary day for Hank Morgan, a capable and inventive engineer hailing from Connecticut. He had always been a practical man, grounded in the certainties of the 19th century, where science and reason reigned supreme. That particular morning, Hank was engrossed in his work at the Colt Firearms Company, overseeing the production of revolvers, when a disagreement with a fellow worker escalated into a physical confrontation. Hank, always ready to defend his principles, found himself in a scuffle. In the ensuing melee, a heavy tool was swung, striking him sharply on the head. His world spun into darkness, and he lost consciousness. When Hank awoke, he felt the warmth of the sun on his face and the sensation of rough ground beneath him. Groggily, he opened his eyes and was met with a sight that defied all logic. He was lying on the edge of a dense forest, the likes of which he had never seen before. Tall, ancient trees loomed overhead, their leaves rustling in a gentle breeze that carried the scents of wildflowers and earth. The sounds of birdsong and distant chatter of animals filled the air. Dazed, Hank struggled to his feet, his head throbbing with pain. As his vision cleared, he noticed a group of people nearby, dressed in strange, archaic clothing. They wore tunics, cloaks, and armor that seemed to belong to a bygone era, far removed from his industrialized world. Hank's mind raced to make sense of the situation. Was this some elaborate prank? A historical reenactment, perhaps? But everything felt too real, too vivid. Before he could gather his thoughts, the group spotted him. Their eyes widened in surprise and suspicion. One of them, a burly man with a bushy beard and a sword at his side, barked an order. Instantly, Hank was surrounded by several armed men. The bearded man, who appeared to be their leader, scrutinized Hank with a mix of curiosity and distrust. "Who art thou, stranger? What manner of garb is this?" the leader demanded, pointing at Hank's clothes, which were utterly foreign to the medieval assembly. Hank's confusion deepened. He realized that the man's speech was archaic, laced with words and phrases that seemed plucked from centuries past. Hank tried to speak, but his words came out jumbled and nonsensical. His mind was a whirlpool of disbelief and shock. The armed men, interpreting his incoherence as resistance or madness, seized him roughly and bound his hands. Despite his protests, Hank was dragged through the forest, towards a majestic castle that loomed in the distance. The castle's towering spires and thick stone walls spoke of an age long gone, an age of knights and kings, of chivalry and feudal power. As they approached the castle gates, Hank's heart pounded in his chest. He was led through the bustling courtyard, where he glimpsed blacksmiths hammering away at anvils, soldiers practicing their swordplay, and peasants going about their daily chores. The sights and sounds were overwhelming, a cacophony of the medieval world that was both fascinating and terrifying. Hank was taken into the grand hall of the castle, an immense room with high, vaulted ceilings and walls adorned with tapestries depicting heroic deeds and mythical creatures. The air was thick with the scent of burning torches and the murmur of courtly activity. At the far end of the hall, seated on a magnificent throne, was a regal figure dressed in rich, ornate robes. His presence commanded respect and authority. Hank's captors forced him to his knees before the throne. The regal figure leaned forward, his keen eyes studying Hank with intense interest. It was then that Hank realized he was in the presence of King Arthur, the legendary ruler of Camelot. The knights gathered around the throne, including the famed Sir Lancelot and Sir Gawain, eyed Hank with a mixture of suspicion and curiosity. King Arthur raised a hand, and the hall fell silent. "Who is this man that has been brought before us?" he asked, his voice deep and commanding. The bearded man who had captured Hank stepped forward. "Your Majesty, we found this stranger at the edge of the forest. His speech and attire are unlike any we have seen. We fear he may be a spy or a sorcerer." King Arthur's gaze shifted back to Hank. "What say you to these charges, stranger? Speak, and explain yourself." Hank, still reeling from the shock of his situation, took a deep breath. He realized that his survival depended on his ability to communicate and make sense of the bizarre predicament he found himself in. Summoning all his courage, he spoke in the clearest voice he could muster. "Your Majesty, I am no spy or sorcerer. My name is Hank Morgan, and I come from a land far beyond your understanding. I was working in my shop when a blow to my head brought me here, to your time and place. I do not know how this happened, but I mean no harm to you or your people." The court erupted in whispers and murmurs. The concept of time travel was beyond their comprehension, and many found it difficult to believe Hank's story. Merlin, the king's trusted advisor and magician, stepped forward, his eyes narrowing as he scrutinized Hank. "This man speaks of things that are impossible," Merlin declared. "Only magic can transport someone across time and space. If he is not a sorcerer, then he is surely a madman." King Arthur, however, was a wise and fair ruler. He sensed that there was more to Hank's story and decided to give him a chance. "We shall not be hasty in our judgment," he proclaimed. "Let us learn more about this man and his strange tale." With that, Hank was escorted to a chamber where he would be held under guard. As he sat in the dimly lit room, Hank's mind raced. How could he prove his story? How could he navigate this ancient world with its customs and dangers? He knew he had to find a way to survive and perhaps even find a way back to his own time. As night fell, Hank gazed out of the small window in his chamber, looking at the stars twinkling in the sky. He felt a mix of awe and trepidation. He was in the court of King Arthur, a place of legend and myth. His engineering mind began to churn with ideas. Perhaps he could use his knowledge to gain the trust of these people, to show them the wonders of his own time. But for now, he needed rest. Tomorrow would be the beginning of an incredible journey, one that would change his life and the lives of those around him forever. Chapter 2: Imprisonment and Execution. In the days that followed his strange arrival, Hank Morgan found himself confined to a dank and dark cell deep within the castle's stone walls. The only light came from a small, high window that let in a thin shaft of sunlight during the day and a sliver of moonlight at night. The air was cold and damp, filled with the smell of mildew and despair. Hank's head throbbed where he had been struck, but his mind was clearer now, racing with thoughts and plans. Word had spread quickly through Camelot about the strange man who had appeared from nowhere. The knights and nobles debated his fate, with most leaning towards seeing him as a sorcerer or an agent of some dark power. Merlin, the king's enigmatic advisor, was particularly vocal about the dangers Hank posed. Merlin's jealousy and fear of the unknown fueled his insistence that Hank be dealt with swiftly and harshly. King Arthur, though intrigued by Hank's story, felt the pressure of his court's rising anxiety. The Middle Ages were a time of superstition and fear of the unknown. In such an environment, Anything that couldn't be explained by their limited knowledge was often attributed to magic or the devil. It was under these circumstances that Arthur, despite his initial inclination to learn more about Hank, decreed that the stranger should be tried and judged according to their laws. The trial was held in the Great Hall, a grand but intimidating chamber adorned with tapestries depicting heroic battles and legendary beasts. Hank was brought before the king and his court, his hands bound with heavy chains. The hall was filled with knights, nobles, and common folk, all eager to witness the fate of the mysterious stranger. Their faces were a mix of curiosity, fear, and hostility. The proceedings were swift and brutal. Merlin presented the case against Hank, citing his unusual attire, strange speech, and the circumstances of his appearance as evidence of sorcery. Hank, given a chance to speak in his defense, tried to explain his situation again. He spoke of his work as an engineer, of the scientific advancements of his time, and of the accident that had brought him here. But his words fell on deaf ears. To the medieval mind, his explanation sounded like the ravings of a madman or worse, the cunning lies of a sorcerer. Merlin called for witnesses, including the men who had captured Hank. They recounted their encounter, emphasizing his strange appearance and incoherent speech. The crowd murmured in agreement, their fear and suspicion growing. Finally, King Arthur, with a heavy heart, pronounced the sentence: Hank was to be burned at the stake at dawn, a punishment reserved for witches and sorcerers. Back in his cell, Hank's mind raced as he faced the grim reality of his situation. The cold stone walls seemed to close in on him, and the hours until dawn ticked away with agonizing slowness. Desperate to find a way out, Hank racked his brain for any piece of knowledge or skill that could save him. It was then that he remembered an important detail from his studies back in Connecticut: an upcoming solar eclipse. Hank had always been fascinated by astronomy, and he recalled reading about a solar eclipse that was due to occur around this time in history. The exact date had been etched in his memory, and as he calculated the days, he realized that the eclipse was set to happen the very next day. This was his chance. He knew that a solar eclipse would be a terrifying and awe-inspiring event for people of this era, who would have no scientific explanation for it. If he could use this knowledge to his advantage, he might just be able to save himself. As the first light of dawn crept into his cell, Hank heard the heavy footsteps of the guards coming to take him to his execution. They led him through the cold corridors and out into the courtyard where the stake had been prepared. A large crowd had gathered, their faces grim and expectant. The pyre was piled high with wood, ready to ignite. Hank was tied to the stake, and the executioner stepped forward, a torch in hand. Just as the torch was about to touch the wood, Hank called out in a loud, commanding voice, "Wait! I can prove my power. Do not light the fire. I can make the sun disappear from the sky." The crowd gasped, and even the executioner hesitated. King Arthur, who had come to witness the execution, raised a hand to signal a halt. "What do you mean, stranger?" he asked, his voice filled with a mix of skepticism and curiosity. Hank took a deep breath, drawing on every ounce of his confidence. "Today, within the hour, the sun will vanish and the world will be plunged into darkness. If this happens, it will be a sign that I am not a mere mortal, but a powerful being. If I am proven right, I ask that you spare my life." The court was abuzz with whispers and speculation. Merlin scoffed at the idea, but King Arthur, intrigued, decided to grant Hank this last request. The execution was postponed, and Hank was untied from the stake, though still closely guarded. The crowd waited with bated breath, their eyes fixed on the sky. As the minutes passed, Hank's anxiety grew. He prayed that his memory was accurate and that the eclipse would occur as predicted. Then, just as doubt began to creep in, a strange darkness started to spread across the sky. The sun, once bright and shining, was slowly being covered by the moon. The light dimmed, and a chilling shadow fell over the land. The people gasped in terror, some falling to their knees in prayer, others crying out in fear. The court was in chaos. Merlin's face turned pale, and even King Arthur looked unnerved. Hank stood tall, his heart pounding with a mixture of relief and triumph. "Behold! I have made the sun disappear. Do you still doubt my power?" King Arthur, his eyes wide with awe, raised his hand to silence the crowd. "The sun has indeed vanished as he said it would. This is a sign, a powerful sign. Release him at once." The guards quickly untied Hank, and the crowd watched in stunned silence as the sky gradually brightened again, the eclipse passing. King Arthur approached Hank, his expression a mix of respect and curiosity. "You have shown us a great marvel today. Perhaps you are not the sorcerer we feared, but a man of great wisdom and knowledge. We shall not only spare your life, but I would have you join us as an advisor, to learn more about the wonders you possess." Hank, overwhelmed with relief and gratitude, bowed deeply. "Thank you, Your Majesty. I will do my best to serve you and share what I know." As the crowd dispersed, still buzzing with the excitement and fear of what they had witnessed, Hank was led back to the castle, not as a prisoner, but as a valued guest. His quick thinking and knowledge had saved his life, and now he had the chance to make a real impact in this strange new world. He knew that his journey was far from over, and many challenges lay ahead, but for the first time since his arrival, he felt a glimmer of hope. Chapter 3: The Sorcerer's Feat. The eclipse had shaken Camelot to its core. The people, unaccustomed to such astronomical phenomena, were filled with awe and fear. Whispers of Hank's power spread quickly, and tales of his feat grew more grandiose with each retelling. By the time the sun returned to its full glory, Hank Morgan had been firmly entrenched in the collective consciousness as a powerful sorcerer, a man who could command the very heavens. King Arthur, ever the wise and judicious ruler, saw potential in Hank that extended beyond the immediate terror of the eclipse. He recognized the value in Hank's knowledge, perceiving that his strange powers could bring unprecedented benefits to Camelot. Thus, in the days following the eclipse, Hank was given quarters within the castle, a marked improvement from the dank cell he had previously inhabited. Hank's new chambers were modest but comfortable, a far cry from the stone dungeon he had narrowly escaped. As he settled into his new role, he began to consider the immense possibilities before him. He realized that his survival depended not only on the continued belief in his powers, but also on his ability to bring tangible benefits to the kingdom. He needed to become invaluable to King Arthur and his court. Hank's first official act as advisor was to request an audience with the king. In the grand hall, amidst the richly woven tapestries and the ever-watchful eyes of the court, Hank outlined his vision. "Your Majesty," he began, "I have knowledge from a distant land and time, knowledge that can help your kingdom flourish. I wish to share this with you and your people." King Arthur, intrigued by Hank's confident demeanor and keen intellect, nodded for him to continue. "What kind of knowledge do you possess, Sir Hank?" Arthur asked, his voice filled with curiosity. Hank took a deep breath. "Your Majesty, I can introduce methods and inventions that will improve agriculture, medicine, communication, and many other aspects of daily life. But first, I must earn your trust by demonstrating the practical benefits of my knowledge." With Arthur's consent, Hank began his work. He decided to start with something simple yet revolutionary: agricultural improvements. He introduced the concept of crop rotation, explaining how alternating crops would improve soil fertility and yield better harvests. He also demonstrated the use of a rudimentary seed drill, which allowed seeds to be planted more efficiently and at a consistent depth. These innovations, though basic by modern standards, were groundbreaking for the people of Camelot. Hank worked tirelessly, often late into the night, sketching designs and drafting plans for his various projects. He enlisted the help of a few trusted blacksmiths and carpenters, teaching them the principles of his inventions and overseeing their construction. As the weeks passed, the fields around Camelot began to change. The new methods led to bountiful harvests, and the people marveled at the abundance of food. King Arthur, seeing the positive impact of Hank's ideas, grew even more supportive. He called a council meeting to discuss further projects. "Sir Hank has proven his worth," Arthur declared to the assembled knights and nobles. "What other wonders can you share with us, Sir Hank?" Encouraged by the king's support, Hank decided to tackle healthcare next. He introduced basic hygiene practices, such as the importance of clean water and proper sanitation. He showed the court how to build simple latrines and emphasized the necessity of washing hands to prevent disease. Although these concepts were initially met with skepticism, the undeniable improvement in public health won the people over. Hank also demonstrated basic medical techniques. He trained a group of young men and women as apprentices, teaching them how to treat common injuries and illnesses using methods from his time. They learned about setting broken bones, stitching wounds, and using herbal remedies more effectively. Under his guidance, the kingdom's first rudimentary hospital was established, greatly reducing the mortality rate and earning Hank further admiration and respect. With these successes under his belt, Hank turned his attention to communication. He understood that for a kingdom to thrive, information needed to flow freely and accurately. He devised a simple system of couriers and relays, ensuring messages could be sent swiftly across the land. He also began experimenting with a rudimentary telegraph system, though its implementation would take more time and resources. Throughout all these endeavors, Hank maintained the facade of sorcery, carefully balancing his modern knowledge with the superstitions of the age. He knew that his continued influence depended on the people's belief in his extraordinary abilities. To this end, he occasionally performed small miracles using simple scientific principles. He would create chemical reactions that produced dazzling effects, use magnets to move objects seemingly by magic, and demonstrate basic electricity to light small fires or produce sparks. These displays kept the legend of his powers alive and ensured his position in the court. Despite his growing influence, Hank faced opposition. Merlin, feeling increasingly threatened by Hank's presence and the changes he brought, continued to plot against him. Merlin's dark mutterings and attempts to undermine Hank's work created tension at court. However, King Arthur's firm support and the tangible improvements in the kingdom protected Hank from these machinations. As the months turned into years, Camelot transformed under Hank's guidance. Roads were improved, bridges built, and trade flourished. Education became more widespread as Hank established schools where children learned to read, write, and understand basic scientific principles. The kingdom's economy prospered, and its people enjoyed a higher standard of living than ever before. Hank's relationship with King Arthur deepened into a genuine friendship. They spent long hours discussing philosophy, governance, and the future of Camelot. Arthur's innate wisdom and Hank's innovative mind complemented each other perfectly, creating a partnership that would be remembered in legend. Yet, despite all his successes, Hank was not without his struggles. The medieval mindset was deeply ingrained, and not all welcomed the changes he brought. He had to navigate the delicate balance between progress and tradition, often finding himself at odds with those who clung to the old ways. The nobles, in particular, were wary of the social shifts his reforms threatened to bring. One evening, as Hank and Arthur sat by the fire in the king's private chambers, Arthur spoke candidly. "You have done much for Camelot, my friend, but I sense a burden weighs on you. Tell me, what troubles you?" Hank sighed, staring into the flickering flames. "Your Majesty, I am grateful for your trust and the opportunity to make a difference here. But I fear that without a deeper understanding and acceptance of the principles behind these changes, they may not endure. The people follow because they believe in my magic, but true progress comes from knowledge and reason." Arthur nodded thoughtfully. "You speak the truth, Sir Hank. Change is a slow and arduous path, but you have planted the seeds. In time, they will grow, and the people will come to see the wisdom in your teachings." Encouraged by Arthur's words, Hank redoubled his efforts to educate and inspire those around him. He began holding public demonstrations, where he explained the science behind his miracles in simple terms. He encouraged questioning and curiosity, planting the first seeds of a more enlightened society. As Hank's influence continued to grow, so did the envy and resentment of Merlin. The old magician, feeling increasingly marginalized, plotted one final act to discredit Hank and reclaim his position as the king's chief advisor. But Hank, ever vigilant, was prepared. He knew that Merlin's power lay in fear and ignorance, and he was determined to combat it with knowledge and truth. The day came when Merlin publicly challenged Hank, accusing him of being a fraud and demanding a test of true magical power. The court gathered, and the tension was palpable. Hank accepted the challenge, knowing that this would be a defining moment for him and the future of Camelot. Merlin's test was a dramatic display of conjuring illusions and invoking ancient spells, designed to awe and terrify the onlookers. Hank, in contrast, prepared a series of scientific demonstrations, each more impressive than the last. He showed the principles of magnetism, the effects of electricity, and the wonders of chemistry. Each demonstration was accompanied by clear, simple explanations, revealing the natural laws behind the magic. The climax of the contest came when Hank recreated the eclipse, this time using a simple mechanical model to explain how it worked. The people, seeing the tangible, understandable principles behind the phenomena, were amazed. King Arthur, recognizing the significance of the moment, declared Hank the victor. Merlin, his power broken and his influence shattered, retreated from the court in disgrace. Hank's triumph marked a new era for Camelot, one where knowledge and reason began to take root alongside tradition and chivalry. Thus, Hank Morgan, the Connecticut Yankee, secured his place not just as a sorcerer, but as a visionary who brought light to a dark age. His journey was far from over, but with each passing day, he felt more hopeful about the future he was helping to build. Chapter 4: The beginning of modernization. Hank Morgan, now firmly established as an advisor to King Arthur, was determined to usher Camelot into a new era. His success with the solar eclipse had granted him a reprieve, but he knew that the real work was just beginning. To make a lasting impact, he needed to introduce innovations and reforms that would transform the very fabric of medieval society. The first step was to create a base of operations where he could work on his inventions in secret. Hank chose a secluded location within the castle grounds, away from prying eyes and the superstitions of the court. This hidden workshop became his sanctuary, a place where he could channel his 19th-century knowledge into tangible creations. He selected a few trusted individuals to assist him, those who had shown a genuine curiosity and aptitude for learning. One of his first recruits was Clarence, a young page who had been fascinated by Hank's magic from the beginning. Clarence's loyalty and eagerness to learn made him an ideal apprentice. Together, they gathered materials and tools, often improvising with what was available in the medieval setting. Hank taught Clarence about metallurgy, mechanics, and basic engineering principles. They worked tirelessly, often late into the night, driven by the shared vision of a better future. The hidden workshop buzzed with activity as Hank and his team constructed advanced tools and machinery. One of their early successes was the creation of a lathe, a tool essential for precise metalworking. With the lathe, they could fabricate components for more complex machines. Hank introduced the concept of interchangeable parts, a revolutionary idea that streamlined the manufacturing process and increased efficiency. Hank's next project was the bicycle. He recognized the need for efficient transportation and saw the potential of bicycles to revolutionize travel in Camelot. Using materials from the workshop, he built the first prototype. The frame was crafted from lightweight but sturdy wood, the wheels from strong yet flexible spokes. Hank and his assistants experimented with different designs, refining the mechanics of the pedals and the chain drive. When the first functional bicycle was ready, Hank demonstrated it to King Arthur and the court. The sight of Hank riding the bicycle through the castle grounds was met with astonishment and delight. King Arthur himself took a turn, laughing with the exhilaration of newfound speed and mobility. Soon, bicycles became a common sight in Camelot, providing a practical and enjoyable means of transport for knights, messengers, and even common folk. Emboldened by this success, Hank turned his attention to communication. He knew that the ability to relay information quickly and accurately was crucial for governance and trade. Drawing on his knowledge of telegraphy, he devised a rudimentary form of the telephone. Using copper wire, magnets, and diaphragms made from thin metal sheets, Hank and his team constructed a device that could transmit sound over short distances. The first successful test of the telephone was a momentous occasion. Hank placed one device in the castle and another in the workshop, then had Clarence speak into the receiver. The clarity of the transmitted voice amazed everyone present. King Arthur saw the potential immediately. "With this, we can communicate across the kingdom in an instant," he marveled. "This will change everything." Hank set about installing telephone lines between key locations within Camelot, including the castle, the barracks, and the market. The ability to communicate quickly and efficiently improved coordination and decision-making, bolstering the kingdom's defense and trade. It was a small step, but it laid the groundwork for more sophisticated communication networks in the future. Education was another cornerstone of Hank's modernization efforts. He understood that lasting change required a well-informed populace. To this end, he began teaching select individuals about modern science and technology. He established a school within the castle, where he gave lessons on subjects ranging from basic physics and chemistry to more advanced topics like electricity and mechanics. Among his students were not only young men eager to learn, but also women who had previously been excluded from such knowledge. Hank believed in the importance of educating everyone, regardless of gender, and his inclusive approach fostered a new generation of thinkers and innovators. These students would become the teachers and leaders of tomorrow, spreading the seeds of knowledge throughout the kingdom. One of Hank's most ambitious projects was the creation of a rudimentary form of journalism. He understood that an informed citizenry was crucial for a functioning society. He introduced the concept of a newspaper, a regular publication that would disseminate news, ideas, and knowledge to the people of Camelot. Hank called it the Camelot Chronicle. The first edition of the Camelot Chronicle was a simple affair. Hank and his team used handmade printing presses to produce the paper. The inaugural issue included reports on local events, agricultural tips, scientific explanations, and even a serialized adventure story to capture the public's interest. Distribution was initially limited to the castle and the surrounding village, but as word spread, demand grew. The Chronicle became a sensation. People gathered in taverns and marketplaces to read and discuss its contents. It fostered a sense of community and shared knowledge, bridging the gap between the nobles and the common folk. Hank used the newspaper to promote his reforms, explaining the benefits of new technologies and encouraging public support for modernization efforts. Despite these successes, Hank faced significant challenges. The medieval mindset was deeply entrenched, and not everyone welcomed change. Some nobles saw Hank's innovations as a threat to their traditional power and influence. They whispered behind closed doors, plotting to undermine his efforts. Even among the common folk, there was resistance born of fear and superstition. Merlin, ever the thorn in Hank's side, continued to sow doubt and suspicion. He warned the court that Hank's sorcery could bring ruin to Camelot. Merlin's influence, though diminished, still carried weight, and his followers were numerous. Hank knew that to secure the future he envisioned, he needed to win over not just King Arthur, but the hearts and minds of the people. Hank employed a strategy of transparency and engagement. He held public demonstrations, inviting everyone to see and understand the principles behind his inventions. He patiently explained the science behind the bicycle, the telephone, and other innovations, demystifying them and alleviating fears. His charm, wit, and genuine passion for progress won many converts, though there were still those who clung to the old ways. One of Hank's most significant achievements was the introduction of a public works program. He proposed and oversaw the construction of roads, bridges, and aqueducts, improving infrastructure and connectivity throughout the kingdom. These projects provided employment and improved living conditions, further bolstering his reputation and the acceptance of his ideas. As Camelot transformed under Hank's guidance, he never lost sight of his ultimate goal, to bring about a renaissance of knowledge and innovation. He knew that true progress required time and perseverance, and he was committed to seeing his vision through. The kingdom's transformation was gradual but profound, as medieval Camelot began to embrace the principles of modernity. Hank's efforts extended beyond technology and infrastructure. He worked to reform the legal system, advocating for fairer laws and practices. He introduced concepts like trial by jury and the presumption of innocence, laying the foundation for a more just and equitable society. These reforms were met with resistance from some quarters, but King Arthur's unwavering support ensured their implementation. The years passed, and Camelot blossomed into a beacon of progress and enlightenment. The once impenetrable walls of tradition began to crack, allowing the light of reason and innovation to shine through. Hank's hidden workshop became a symbol of this transformation, a place where dreams were forged into reality. Through it all, Hank remained mindful of his roots. He often thought of his home in Connecticut, drawing strength from the knowledge and experiences of his own time. He knew that his journey was far from over, and that there were still many challenges to face. But with each passing day, he felt more hopeful about the future he was helping to build. In the end, Hank Morgan's legacy would be remembered not just as a sorcerer who commanded the sun, but as a visionary who brought light to a dark age. His innovations and reforms laid the groundwork for a new Camelot, one that embraced knowledge, justice, and progress. And though the road ahead was long, Hank knew that the seeds he had planted would continue to grow, shaping the destiny of a kingdom for generations to come. Chapter 5: Sir Sagramor's Challenge. Hank Morgan's efforts to modernize Camelot had begun to yield tangible results. Roads and bridges now connected once isolated parts of the kingdom, schools were educating a new generation in science and literacy, and the Camelot Chronicle was fostering a more informed populace. Despite these advancements, Hank's growing influence faced opposition, particularly from Merlin, the court's established magician. Merlin's subtle sabotage and open disapproval found an ally in Sir Sagramor le Desirous, a knight fiercely loyal to tradition. Sir Sagramor viewed Hank not only as a threat to the established order but also as a charlatan. One day, Sir Sagramor publicly challenged Hank to a duel, intending to expose him as a fraud. The challenge was issued in the Great Hall during a gathering of the court. Sir Sagramor, imposing in his armor, declared, "Sir Hank, I challenge you to a duel to prove your worth. Your tricks are no match for true knightly valor." The hall fell silent as all eyes turned to Hank. King Arthur, concerned but curious, listened as Hank responded. "Sir Sagramor, I accept your challenge, but I request a delay. I am no knight and need time to prepare. Give me 3 years, and I shall meet you in the field." King Arthur agreed, seeing the fairness in Hank's request. Sir Sagramor, displeased but bound by the king's decision, accepted the delay. Hank had bought himself precious time, not only to prepare for the duel but also to continue modernizing Camelot and solidifying his influence. The years of preparation. During the ensuing years, Hank intensified his work. He expanded his secret workshop, bringing in more trusted assistants and equipping it with advanced tools. The workshop became a hive of innovation, where new inventions were crafted and refined. Hank also continued his educational efforts, ensuring that knowledge spread throughout the kingdom. One significant project was the development of firearms. Starting with simple muskets, Hank taught his aides to produce and use them, intending to reveal them only as a last resort. He also fostered improvements in agriculture, transportation, and communication, introducing crop rotation, refined bicycles, and expanded telegraph lines. Hank's influence extended to social reforms, advocating for fairer laws and public health measures. These reforms, though initially resisted, gradually gained acceptance. He also dedicated time to physical training, learning the basics of combat and designing protective gear and strategies for the duel. Gaining support. Hank's relentless efforts won him many supporters, including King Arthur, Sir Lancelot, Sir Bedivere, and Sir Gawain. The common folk began to see Hank as a hero, benefiting from improved food production, transportation, education, and healthcare. Even within the court, opinion shifted as the practical benefits of Hank's presence became undeniable. The approach of the duel. As the duel approached, tension grew. Sir Sagramore continued his training, confident in his martial prowess, while Merlin plotted in the background. Hank, focused on his preparations, continued refining his inventions and honing his combat skills. The night before the duel, Hank met with his closest allies to discuss final preparations. King Arthur reassured him, "You have brought much to Camelot, Sir Hank. Whatever happens tomorrow, you have my support and gratitude." The duel. The morning of the duel arrived, and the field outside Camelot was filled with spectators. Sir Sagramore, resplendent in his armor, stood ready. Hank, clad in a lighter, more flexible suit of armor he had designed, approached with calm determination. As the duel began, Sir Sagramore charged, but Hank used his agility and strategic knowledge to avoid his powerful attacks. Hank's strategy became clear as he exploited weaknesses in Sagramore's form and used small, hidden mechanisms in his armor to create distractions. The turning point came when Hank, feigning a stumble, lured Sagramore into overextending himself. With a swift move, Hank disarmed Sagramore. The crowd erupted in applause as Hank stood over the fallen knight, extending a hand in peace. "The duel is over, Sir Sagramore. Let us work together for Camelot's future." King Arthur declared, "Sir Hank has proven himself not only in combat but in wisdom and restraint. Strength lies not just in the sword, but in the mind and heart." Hank's victory solidified his position, allowing him to continue his modernization efforts with greater support. Sir Sagramore, humbled, pledged to support Hank. Merlin, seeing his influence wane, retreated. The kingdom, united by a shared vision of progress, looked forward to a bright future filled with innovation and enlightenment. Chapter 6: Journey Through the Kingdom. Hank Morgan's transformative efforts in Camelot were well underway. Roads and bridges spanned the kingdom, new schools buzzed with learning, and the Camelot Chronicle spread knowledge and news. Yet, despite the visible progress, Hank knew that real change required understanding the lives of the common people. To truly grasp the kingdom's needs, he proposed a daring idea to King Arthur, a journey through the kingdom, disguised as peasants. King Arthur, intrigued by the prospect of seeing his realm through the eyes of his subjects, agreed. They donned simple, coarse clothing, leaving behind their royal attire and titles. With Clarence accompanying them for additional support, they set out on foot, blending into the rural landscape. The journey begins. Their journey took them through rolling countryside, dense forests, and bustling villages. In each place, they encountered the reality of medieval life, starkly contrasting with the relative comfort of Camelot. They observed hard-working farmers struggling with poor harvests, families living in dilapidated huts, and artisans toiling long hours for meager earnings. The group made their way to a small village where they sought shelter for the night. They were taken in by a kind but impoverished family. Over a simple meal of bread and soup, the family shared their woes: high taxes, constant fear of bandit attacks, and the indifference of local lords. Arthur, deeply moved by their plight, listened intently, asking questions and offering words of comfort. As they traveled further, they encountered more suffering. They saw fields ravaged by disease, leaving families without food. They met villagers who had been unfairly imprisoned for minor infractions, their lives ruined by the harsh legal system. Hank and Arthur also witnessed the brutal enforcement of feudal obligations, with knights and lords exacting harsh penalties on those who failed to meet their quotas. Witnessing injustice. One particularly harrowing experience occurred in a market town. Hank and Arthur arrived on market day, hoping to blend in with the crowd and observe. They saw merchants selling their wares, farmers trading produce, and townsfolk bustling about. But amid the activity, they also witnessed a public execution. A young man, accused of stealing a loaf of bread, was to be hanged. The townspeople gathered, some out of morbid curiosity, others in silent protest. Arthur, horrified, turned to Hank. "Is there no mercy in this land? This boy's crime is born of hunger, not malice." Hank, equally disturbed, replied, "This is the reality for many. Harsh punishments for minor crimes, driven by desperation." As the executioner prepared the noose, Arthur, unable to contain himself, stepped forward. "Stop this madness. This boy needs food, not death." The crowd gasped, but before Arthur could do more, he was pulled back by Hank, who whispered urgently, "Remember our disguise. We cannot reveal ourselves now." Reluctantly, Arthur watched as the boy was led to his fate. The experience left a deep impression on him, reinforcing the need for compassionate reform. Captured and enslaved. Their journey took a darker turn as they ventured into a forested region known for bandit activity. One night, as they camped under the stars, they were ambushed by a group of rough-looking men. Despite their efforts to fight back, Hank, Arthur, and Clarence were overpowered and bound. The bandits, unaware of their true identities, decided to sell them into slavery. They were taken to a remote stronghold where a ruthless slave trader operated. Stripped of their possessions and dignity, they were thrown into a dank, crowded cell with other captives. For the first time, Arthur experienced the brutality of slavery firsthand. They were forced to labor in harsh conditions, subjected to the whims of cruel overseers. The food was scarce and the punishment severe. Hank, though resourceful, found it challenging to maintain hope in such dire circumstances. Experiencing brutality. Days turned into weeks as they toiled under the unforgiving sun. Arthur, once a revered king, now struggled alongside commoners, his hands blistered and his spirit tested. Yet, through this ordeal, he gained a profound understanding of his subjects' suffering. In one particularly brutal incident, a fellow slave collapsed from exhaustion. The overseer, a heartless brute, raised his whip to strike the fallen man. Arthur, driven by his sense of justice, intervened. "Stop! He needs rest, not punishment." The overseer laughed cruelly. "And who are you to give orders, peasant?" Arthur's eyes blazed with defiance. "A man who values life and dignity." The overseer lashed out at Arthur, but Hank and Clarence, despite their own exhaustion, stepped in to protect him. Their solidarity inspired the other slaves, who began to resist the overseer's cruelty in small but significant ways. Turning the tide. The turning point came when Hank devised a plan to escape. Using his knowledge of mechanics and engineering, he fashioned a makeshift lock-picking tool from scraps he had secretly gathered. One night, under the cover of darkness, they managed to unlock their cell and free themselves. The escape was fraught with danger, but their determination and cunning saw them through. They overpowered the guards and led the other slaves to freedom. The group moved stealthily through the forest, avoiding patrols and relying on Hank's navigational skills to guide them to safety. Return to Camelot. Eventually, they made their way back to Camelot, where their sudden disappearance had caused much concern. Their return was met with relief and joy, but the experience had irrevocably changed them, especially Arthur. King Arthur, now with a deeper understanding of his people's suffering, became more committed to Hank's reforms. He addressed the court, recounting their journey and the injustices they had witnessed. "We must strive for a kingdom where justice and compassion prevail. Sir Hank's vision is not just about machines and inventions, it's about creating a fair and humane society." Hank, too, was changed. The journey had strengthened his resolve to fight for a better future. He redoubled his efforts, pushing forward with reforms that would improve the lives of all, from peasants to nobles. Legacy of the journey. The journey through the kingdom had a profound impact on Camelot. King Arthur's newfound empathy inspired the court and the people. Reforms were implemented more rapidly, with a focus on justice and compassion. The legal system was overhauled to ensure fairer treatment, and efforts to alleviate poverty and hunger were intensified. Hank's innovations continued to spread, but now with a greater emphasis on social justice. He introduced new agricultural techniques to improve food production, established more schools to educate the populace, and expanded the telegraph system to improve communication. The story of their journey, captured in the Camelot Chronicle, resonated deeply with the people. It became a symbol of the new Camelot, a kingdom where the rulers understood and cared for their subjects, and where progress was measured not just by technological advancements, but by the well-being of all its inhabitants. Hank and Arthur's journey through the kingdom was more than an adventure, it was a transformative experience that united the realm in a shared vision of progress and compassion. Together, they forged a legacy that would endure, shaping Camelot into a beacon of enlightenment and justice for generations to come. Chapter 7: Escaping Slavery. The oppressive reality of their captivity had taken a toll on Hank Morgan and King Arthur. Stripped of their royal and technological resources, they endured the harshness of medieval slavery. Yet, the experience also ignited a deeper resolve within both men. They realized that escaping was not just about regaining their freedom, but also about returning to Camelot with a renewed determination to reform the kingdom. The planning phase. Hank's engineering mind never rested, even under the grueling conditions of slavery. He meticulously observed the routines of their captors, noting guard shifts, vulnerabilities in the stronghold structure, and potential resources that could aid their escape. He shared his observations with Arthur and Clarence during the few moments they could converse without drawing attention. One evening, after a particularly harsh day of labor, Hank gathered Arthur and Clarence. "We must escape, and soon," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the din of the camp. "I've identified some weaknesses in their security. With careful planning, we can exploit these and make our way back to Camelot." Arthur, though physically worn, nodded with a determined gleam in his eyes. "We shall do what is necessary. These people suffer as my subjects do. This escape is not just for us but for them as well." Over the next several days, Hank discreetly collected materials, scraps of metal, bits of cloth, and any small tools he could pilfer. He crafted a rudimentary lockpicking tool and fashioned makeshift weapons. Clarence, with his youthful agility, scouted potential escape routes, while Arthur inspired the other captives with quiet words of hope and solidarity. The escape. The night of their escape arrived. The camp was quiet, the guards complacent in their belief that their prisoners were too exhausted and demoralized to attempt anything. Hank, Arthur, and Clarence silently moved through the shadows, unlocking the cell and freeing their fellow captives. The plan hinged on stealth and speed. Any misstep could lead to their capture and brutal punishment. Using his knowledge of mechanics and structural weaknesses, Hank disabled key points in the camp's defenses, causing minor chaos and confusion. This distraction allowed the group to slip past the guards. Clarence led the way through the dense forest, his keen senses guiding them through the underbrush and away from the well-trodden paths. Despite their careful planning, the escape was fraught with danger. At one point, they encountered a patrol. Hank quickly devised a distraction, using a makeshift smoke bomb he had created from gathered materials. The smoke confused and disoriented the guards, allowing the escapees to slip away undetected. They traveled through the night, putting as much distance between themselves and their former captors as possible. Hank's navigation skills, combined with Clarence's knowledge of the terrain, proved invaluable. Arthur, though burdened by the physical toll of their ordeal, pushed forward with unwavering determination, offering encouragement and support to those flagging behind. Reaching safety. After several days of arduous travel, the group finally reached the outskirts of Camelot. Their arrival was met with a mixture of relief and astonishment. The knights and nobles, who had feared the worst, welcomed them back with open arms. King Arthur and Hank were quickly ushered into the castle, where they were given food, rest, and medical attention. As they recovered, Arthur recounted their harrowing experience to the court. He spoke of the brutality they had witnessed and endured, and the resilience of those who had suffered under the same yoke. "We have seen the darkest depths of our kingdom," he declared, "and we must act to eradicate such inhumanity. Our duty is to all our subjects, to ensure that none live in such wretched conditions." Strengthening the resolve. The ordeal had a profound impact on King Arthur. He became even more committed to supporting Hank's modernization efforts, recognizing that technological advancements alone were not enough. They needed to be accompanied by social and legal reforms. Arthur's empathy for his people deepened, and he vowed to use his authority to create a more just and humane society. Hank, too, was galvanized by the experience. He saw firsthand the urgent need for change and the potential of his innovations to improve lives. With Arthur's full support, he began implementing new plans to overhaul the kingdom's infrastructure and social systems. Implementing reforms. Hank and Arthur initiated a comprehensive series of reforms. They started by improving the legal system to ensure fairer treatment and protection of all citizens, regardless of their social standing. They abolished the most egregious forms of punishment and established courts where the accused could receive a fair trial. In parallel, Hank accelerated his efforts to modernize the kingdom's infrastructure. He introduced new agricultural techniques to increase food production and combat famine. Irrigation systems, crop rotation, and new tools were distributed widely, empowering farmers and ensuring a stable food supply. Transportation improvements were also a priority. Hank designed and oversaw the construction of better roads and bridges, facilitating trade and communication across the kingdom. He expanded the telegraph system, enabling faster dissemination of information and more efficient governance. Education reforms were another key focus. Hank established more schools and ensured they were accessible to all, promoting literacy and knowledge of modern sciences and technologies. These institutions also taught principles of justice and empathy, fostering a generation that valued innovation and fairness. Addressing social inequities. Recognizing the social inequities that had fueled their captivity, Hank and Arthur also focused on social reforms. They worked to improve living conditions for the poor, building better housing and ensuring access to clean water and sanitation. Public health initiatives were introduced, reducing the prevalence of diseases that had previously ravaged the population. They also tackled the issue of slavery head-on. Arthur issued a decree abolishing slavery throughout the kingdom, providing former slaves with opportunities to rebuild their lives. Hank's efforts to educate and empower these individuals helped integrate them into society, turning former captives into productive and respected citizens. Rallying support. The changes faced resistance from those who benefited from the old systems, but Hank and Arthur's first-hand experiences lent credibility and urgency to their cause. They rallied support from progressive nobles and influential knights like Sir Lancelot, Sir Bedivere, and Sir Gawain. The Camelot Chronicle played a crucial role in swaying public opinion, publishing articles that highlighted the benefits of the reforms and the moral imperative behind them. Arthur's speeches and personal commitment inspired many. He traveled across the kingdom, speaking directly to his subjects, listening to their grievances, and explaining the necessity of the changes. His empathy and leadership won the hearts of the people, creating a groundswell of support for the new direction Camelot was taking. The long-term impact. Hank and Arthur's collaborative efforts began to transform Camelot. The kingdom became a model of progress, where innovation and compassion worked hand in hand. The new infrastructure boosted economic growth, and the social reforms fostered a more just and equitable society. The abolition of slavery and improvements in education and healthcare uplifted the most vulnerable, creating a more cohesive and resilient community. The journey from captivity to freedom had left an indelible mark on both men. For Arthur, it was a journey of enlightenment, deepening his connection with his people and strengthening his resolve to rule with fairness and compassion. For Hank, it reinforced the power of knowledge and innovation to bring about meaningful change. Their partnership, forged in adversity, continued to shape Camelot's destiny. Together, they proved that true leadership combined vision with empathy, and that progress required both technological advancements and a commitment to justice. The legacy of their journey endured, laying the foundation for a future where all of Camelot's citizens could thrive in a kingdom that valued every life. Chapter 8: The Duel with Sir Sagramore. The day of the long-awaited duel between Hank Morgan and Sir Sagramore le Desirous had finally arrived. The duel had been postponed for several years, during which Hank had continued his modernization efforts in Camelot, earning the support and admiration of many. However, the looming challenge from Sir Sagramore, a staunch traditionalist and formidable knight, was a constant reminder that not everyone accepted Hank's influence and innovations. Preparations for the duel. Hank spent the days leading up to the duel in intense preparation. He refined his inventions and practiced his strategies, knowing that his victory would not only demonstrate the superiority of modern tools over medieval weaponry but also solidify his standing in Camelot. His workshop buzzed with activity as he and his trusted assistants fine-tuned his weapons, a lasso and a revolver. The lasso, an invention inspired by the cowboys of the American West, was designed for speed and precision. The revolver, a simple yet effective firearm, represented the pinnacle of Hank's technological prowess. Both weapons, while unfamiliar to the Knights of Camelot, were chosen for their ability to neutralize Sir Sagramor's brute strength and martial skill. King Arthur, though anxious about the outcome, supported Hank. "You have done much for Camelot, Sir Hank. This duel will show that progress and innovation are as noble as tradition and strength." Hank appreciated Arthur's encouragement but knew that the true test would be on the field of combat. He also sought advice from his close allies, including Sir Lancelot and Clarence, who offered tactical insights and moral support. The day of the duel. The day dawned bright and clear, with a palpable sense of anticipation in the air. The duel was to take place on the field outside Camelot, a venue chosen for its visibility and symbolic significance. Knights, nobles, and commoners gathered, eager to witness the clash between the old ways and the new. Hank arrived early, clad in a specially designed suit of light armor that allowed for maximum mobility. He carried his lasso and revolver, the latter concealed to maintain an element of surprise. Sir Sagramor, resplendent in his gleaming armor, exuded confidence and disdain for Hank's unorthodox weapons. King Arthur, seated on a raised platform, signaled for the duel to commence. The atmosphere was electric, with the crowd hushed in anticipation. The duel begins. Sir Sagramor advanced first, wielding a massive sword that gleamed in the sunlight. He moved with the grace and power of a seasoned warrior, clearly intent on overwhelming Hank with sheer force. Hank, however, remained calm and focused. He knew that engaging Sagramor directly in hand-to-hand combat would be futile. As Sagramor charged, Hank deftly sidestepped, using his agility to avoid the initial onslaught. He quickly uncoiled his lasso, throwing it with practiced precision. The loop tightened around Sagramor's sword arm, pulling it off balance. The knight, caught off guard, stumbled slightly but quickly regained his footing, anger flashing in his eyes. Sagramor attempted to cut the lasso with his sword, but Hank tugged hard, causing the knight to drop his weapon. The crowd gasped, witnessing the first signs of Hank's ingenuity in action. Enraged, Sagramor lunged at Hank, aiming to bring him down with his sheer physicality. Hank anticipated this move. With a swift motion, he drew his revolver and fired a warning shot into the ground near Sagramor's feet. The sudden explosion of sound and smoke startled the knight and the spectators alike. Sir Sagramor paused, his eyes widening in disbelief at the unfamiliar weapon. Demonstrating superiority. Seizing the moment, Hank addressed the crowd. "This is the power of knowledge and innovation. We can build a future where brute strength is not the only measure of a man's worth." Sagramor, undeterred by the display, renewed his attack with a ferocious roar. Hank, maintaining his composure, fired another shot, this time grazing Sagramor's armored shoulder. The impact was enough to halt the knight's advance and force him to reconsider his strategy. Realizing the futility of a direct assault, Sagramore attempted to outmaneuver Hank, circling and searching for an opening. Hank, however, used his agility and the element of surprise to stay one step ahead. He fired another shot, striking Sagramore's sword hand and disarming him completely. The sword clattered to the ground, leaving the knight defenseless. With Sagramore disarmed and visibly shaken, Hank approached cautiously. He did not want to humiliate the knight, but rather to demonstrate the efficacy of his methods. "Yield, Sir Sagramore. There is no dishonor in recognizing the power of progress." Sagramore, breathing heavily and clearly outmatched, hesitated. Pride and tradition warred within him, but the reality of his situation was undeniable. Finally, he nodded, signaling his surrender. Victory and its aftermath. King Arthur stood, raising his hand to silence the murmuring crowd. Sir Hank has shown us that innovation and progress are vital to our kingdom. This duel is a testament to the strength of new ideas and their rightful place in Camelot. The crowd erupted in applause, acknowledging Hank's victory and the significance of his achievements. Sir Sagramore, though defeated, bowed to Hank, a gesture of respect and acceptance. "You have bested me, Sir Hank. I see now that there is value in your ways. I pledge to support your efforts for the good of Camelot." Hank extended his hand, helping Sagramore to his feet. "Together, we can build a stronger, more prosperous kingdom." Solidifying influence. Hank's victory in the duel had far-reaching consequences. It solidified his reputation as a formidable innovator and leader, earning him respect even from those who had previously doubted him. The court, witnessing the practical superiority of his inventions, became more open to his ideas. King Arthur, already a staunch ally, redoubled his support for Hank's modernization projects. Hank used the momentum from his victory to push forward with ambitious plans. He expanded his secret workshop into a full-fledged academy, where knights and commoners alike could learn about modern science, engineering, and technology. This academy became a hub of innovation, attracting the brightest minds in Camelot. Expanding innovations. Hank introduced more advanced machinery and tools, improving productivity and quality of life throughout the kingdom. He developed a more efficient water supply system, reducing the incidence of disease and ensuring a steady supply of clean water. New methods of construction led to stronger, more durable buildings, enhancing the safety and comfort of the population. He also focused on enhancing the kingdom's defense capabilities. With the introduction of firearms and improved armor, Camelot's military strength increased significantly. However, Hank emphasized that these innovations were meant to protect and preserve peace rather than wage war. Social reforms. Beyond technological advancements, Hank continued to champion social reforms. He worked closely with King Arthur to implement fairer laws and a more just legal system. The experiences of their journey and the ordeal of slavery had deeply impacted both men, making them more empathetic and committed to creating a society where justice and compassion prevailed. Education remained a cornerstone of Hank's vision. He expanded the network of schools, ensuring that even the most remote villages had access to learning. These schools not only taught literacy and numeracy, but also instilled values of critical thinking, creativity, and empathy. Uniting the kingdom. Hank's influence extended beyond the walls of Camelot. His innovations and reforms began to unite the kingdom, bridging gaps between different regions and social classes. The improvements in transportation and communication facilitated trade and cultural exchange, fostering a sense of unity and shared purpose. The Camelot Chronicle, now a widely read publication, played a crucial role in spreading Hank's ideas and highlighting the benefits of the new initiatives. Stories of technological marvels, social reforms, and personal triumphs inspired the people and galvanized support for the ongoing transformation of the kingdom. Legacy of the duel. The duel with Sir Sagramore became a defining moment in Camelot's history. It symbolized the triumph of innovation over tradition and marked the beginning of a new era. Hank's victory was not just a personal achievement, but a testament to the power of progress and the potential for a brighter future. Hank and King Arthur's partnership, strengthened by shared experiences and mutual respect, continued to drive Camelot forward. Together, they worked tirelessly to build a kingdom where knowledge and compassion were the guiding principles. Their efforts laid the foundation for a legacy that would endure, inspiring future generations to embrace progress and strive for a just and enlightened society. Conclusion. The duel with Sir Sagramore was more than a physical confrontation. It was a clash of ideologies and a pivotal moment in Camelot's journey towards modernization. Hank's victory demonstrated the effectiveness of his innovations and cemented his role as a key architect of the kingdom's future. With King Arthur's unwavering support, Hank's vision for a prosperous, just, and enlightened Camelot began to take shape, setting the stage for an era of unprecedented growth and harmony. Chapter 9: War and Conflict. The winds of change sweeping through Camelot under Hank Morgan's guidance stirred both admiration and resentment. While many embraced the advancements and reforms, a significant faction, led by Merlin, staunchly opposed these transformations. They viewed Hank's innovations as a direct threat to the established order and their own power. Merlin, feeling increasingly sidelined and threatened by Hank's growing influence, began to rally these discontented nobles. The brewing storm. Merlin, an ancient and powerful figure, had long been the court's primary source of mystical knowledge and guidance. Hank's scientific approach and technological prowess challenged Merlin's mystical authority, creating an inevitable conflict. Merlin capitalized on the fears and uncertainties of the traditionalist nobles, who believed that Hank's changes undermined the very fabric of their society. In secret meetings held in dimly lit chambers, Merlin stoked the flames of rebellion. Hank Morgan's so-called progress is but a facade, a threat to our way of life. We must act before Camelot is irrevocably changed. We must restore the old ways, the ways of magic and tradition. The discontented nobles, already uneasy about the rapid changes, were easily swayed by Merlin's impassioned arguments. They began to plot the overthrow of King Arthur and Hank, envisioning a return to the old order where their power and influence were unchallenged. The outbreak of civil war. The tension finally snapped, and civil war erupted. The kingdom was divided, with Merlin and the rebellious nobles rallying their forces against King Arthur and Hank. The once peaceful and prosperous Camelot became a battleground, with neighbors and families torn apart by the conflict. Hank, understanding the gravity of the situation, took charge of the kingdom's defenses. His knowledge of modern military strategy and technology became crucial in the fight against the rebels. He quickly set up command centers, utilizing telegraphs for swift communication and coordinating the loyalist forces with unprecedented efficiency. The first clashes. The first skirmishes were brutal and chaotic. The rebels, driven by a mixture of fear, nostalgia, and Merlin's manipulation, fought fiercely to reclaim what they saw as their birthright. Hank's forces, though better equipped and strategically superior, faced the challenge of fighting against fellow countrymen. Hank introduced new weaponry and tactics that bewildered the traditionalist forces. His troops were armed with firearms and cannons, while his opponents relied on swords, bows, and outdated siege engines. The disparity in technology gave Hank's forces a significant advantage, but the emotional and psychological toll of civil war weighed heavily on everyone involved. Despite the initial victories, Hank knew that military might alone could not resolve the deeper issues at play. The kingdom was being torn apart not just by swords and bullets, but by conflicting visions of its future. Strategies and countermeasures. Hank devised innovative strategies to minimize bloodshed and bring a swift end to the conflict. He implemented a series of defensive fortifications and established supply lines that ensured his forces were well provisioned. Mobile units, equipped with the latest technology, were dispatched to intercept rebel movements and disrupt their plans. In an effort to weaken Merlin's influence, Hank used the Camelot Chronicle to disseminate information and counter-propaganda. Articles highlighted the benefits of the new innovations and the justice of King Arthur's reign. Stories of the suffering caused by the war and the cruelty of the rebel leaders were published to sway public opinion. King Arthur, deeply troubled by the civil strife, personally appealed to his subjects, urging them to lay down their arms and embrace unity and progress. His speeches, broadcast through Hank's telegraph network and printed in the Chronicle, emphasized the need for peace and cooperation. The turning point. As the conflict dragged on, the toll on the kingdom became apparent. Crops were left untended, villages burned, and countless lives were lost. The once thriving Camelot was now a land of desolation and grief. Both sides suffered heavy casualties, and the morale of the population plummeted. The turning point came during the Battle of Caerleon, a strategic location fiercely contested by both sides. Hank, utilizing his knowledge of modern warfare, devised a plan to capture the rebel stronghold with minimal casualties. He ordered the construction of makeshift armored vehicles, akin to early tanks, which provided crucial protection and firepower. These innovations turned the tide of battle. The rebels, unprepared for such tactics and machinery, were overwhelmed. Merlin, realizing the futility of his resistance, retreated with his closest followers. The capture of Caerleon marked a decisive victory for King Arthur and Hank's forces. The aftermath and reconstruction. The war had been won, but the cost was staggering. Camelot lay in ruins, its fields scorched and its people traumatized. King Arthur and Hank faced the monumental task of rebuilding the kingdom and healing its wounds. Hank's first priority was to restore order and provide relief to the war-torn populace. He mobilized his resources to rebuild infrastructure, ensuring that food, water, and medical aid reached those in need. Temporary shelters were erected, and work began on reconstructing homes and public buildings. King Arthur, deeply moved by the suffering he had witnessed, pledged to address the root causes of the rebellion. He convened councils with representatives from all factions, seeking to reconcile differences and forge a new path forward. The process was arduous, requiring patience, empathy, and compromise. Hank continued to push for technological advancements, but with a greater emphasis on inclusivity and education. He established more schools and workshops, where people from all walks of life could learn about modern science, engineering, and governance. These institutions aimed to bridge the gap between tradition and progress, ensuring that the benefits of modernization were accessible to everyone. The trial of Merlin and the nobles. Merlin and the leading rebel nobles were captured and brought to trial. The proceedings were conducted with fairness, underscoring Arthur and Hank's commitment to justice. Merlin, defiant to the end, defended his actions as necessary to preserve the kingdom's true essence. However, the evidence of his manipulation and the destruction caused by the rebellion was overwhelming. Merlin was sentenced to exile, a decision that balanced justice with mercy. The nobles were given varying sentences, depending on their roles in the conflict. Some were imprisoned, while others were stripped of their titles and lands, but allowed to remain in Camelot to witness and contribute to the rebuilding efforts. Lessons and legacy. The Civil War left an indelible mark on Camelot. The conflict had highlighted the deep divisions within the kingdom, but also demonstrated the resilience and determination of its people. Hank and Arthur's leadership throughout the war had proven that progress and tradition could coexist, and that the true strength of Camelot lay in its ability to adapt and grow. The rebuilding process was long and challenging, but it also presented an opportunity for renewal. The shared experience of the war fostered a sense of unity and common purpose. Communities came together to rebuild, drawing on both ancient traditions and modern innovations to create a stronger, more resilient kingdom. Hank's vision of a modern Camelot began to take shape, with new technologies and social reforms improving the quality of life for all its inhabitants. The kingdom's infrastructure was rebuilt with enhanced designs, making it more robust and efficient. Education and knowledge became cornerstones of society, ensuring that future generations would be better equipped to face challenges and seize opportunities. King Arthur's legacy was solidified as a ruler who had faced adversity with courage and wisdom, guiding his kingdom through its darkest hours and emerging stronger. Hank, too, was celebrated as a visionary and a hero, whose innovations and leadership had transformed Camelot. Conclusion. The war and conflict had tested Camelot's spirit and resolve, but it had also paved the way for a brighter future. The partnership between King Arthur and Hank Morgan, forged in the crucible of battle, continued to drive the kingdom's progress. Together, they built a society where innovation and tradition were not at odds, but worked hand in hand to create a legacy of peace, prosperity, and enlightenment. The scars of the war remained, but they served as reminders of the resilience and unity that defined Camelot's true strength. Chapter 10: The Battle of the Sand Belt. The rebellion, though temporarily subdued, had not been entirely eradicated. Merlin and a group of die-hard nobles, still refusing to accept Hank's modernization and King Arthur's progressive rule, retreated to the remote parts of the kingdom. They regrouped and rallied their forces for one final, desperate attempt to overthrow the king and restore their vision of Camelot. This led to the climactic confrontation known as the Battle of the Sand Belt, a defining moment in Camelot's struggle for its future. The prelude to battle. Hank Morgan, fully aware of the threat posed by the regrouped rebels, spent months fortifying a strategic location known as the Sand Belt. This area, chosen for its natural defensive advantages, became the centerpiece of Hank's final stand against the forces of tradition and superstition. The Sand Belt was transformed into a formidable defensive position. Hank and his team constructed a series of fortifications, trenches, and barriers. Central to this defense were his technological innovations, electric fences powered by generators, and Gatling guns strategically placed to maximize their defensive capability. These weapons, unfamiliar and terrifying to the medieval mind, provided a significant advantage, but Hank knew they would be tested to their limits by the overwhelming numbers of the enemy. The forces assemble. As the rebel forces, led by Merlin and his loyal nobles, gathered for their assault, the tension in the air was palpable. The rebels had amassed a large army, composed of knights, foot soldiers, and mercenaries drawn by promises of land and power. Though lacking in technological prowess, they made up for it in sheer numbers and determination. On the other side, Hank's followers, though fewer in number, were bolstered by their advanced weaponry and the strategic fortifications of the Sand Belt. King Arthur, standing resolutely with Hank, inspired his loyal knights and soldiers with speeches of unity, courage, and the promise of a brighter future. Sir Lancelot, Sir Gawain, and other knights of the Round Table stood ready, their loyalty and prowess in battle unwavering. The battle commences. At dawn, the rebel forces launched their assault. The first wave of attackers, charging with swords and shields, encountered the electric fences. The shocking experience left many incapacitated, causing confusion and fear among the ranks. The Gatling guns, manned by Hank's trained soldiers, unleashed a barrage of bullets, cutting down rows of advancing rebels. Despite the devastating initial losses, the sheer determination and numbers of the rebels drove them forward. They attempted to breach the defenses with makeshift ladders and battering rams, only to be met with fierce resistance. Hank's side, though technologically superior, struggled to hold the line against the relentless onslaught. The battle raged for hours, turning the Sand Belt into a scene of chaos and carnage. Hank, moving from one defensive position to another, coordinated the defense with the help of his telegraph network. He issued commands, adjusted strategies, and ensured that reinforcements were sent to critical points. The air was filled with the sounds of gunfire, clashing steel, and the cries of wounded and dying men. A desperate struggle. As the day wore on, both sides suffered heavy casualties. The ground was littered with the bodies of knights, soldiers, and rebels. The once orderly fortifications of the Sand Belt were stained with blood and marred by the intensity of the battle. Hank's forces, though still holding their ground, were exhausted and depleted. Merlin, using his knowledge of ancient tactics and magic, orchestrated a series of coordinated attacks aimed at breaking through the defenses. He summoned the natural elements, creating fog and lightning to confuse and demoralize Hank's troops. Despite these mystical challenges, Hank's scientific mind remained resolute. He countered Merlin's magic with strategic brilliance, using flares to dispel the fog and grounding rods to neutralize the lightning strikes. The turning point. The turning point of the battle came in the late afternoon. Merlin, in a desperate bid to turn the tide, led a massive charge himself, inspiring his followers with his presence. The rebels, invigorated by their leader's bravery, surged forward with renewed ferocity. They managed to breach one section of the electric fence, pouring through the gap in a chaotic flood. Hank, realizing the critical situation, directed all available forces to the breach. He personally manned one of the Gatling guns, mowing down attackers with grim determination. King Arthur, alongside his knights, engaged in fierce hand-to-hand combat, his presence a beacon of hope and courage for his beleaguered soldiers. The final stand. In the midst of the chaos, Hank and Merlin faced off. Merlin, wielding his magical staff, unleashed a barrage of spells, while Hank used his revolver and tactical acumen to counter the wizard's attacks. Their duel, a clash of science and magic, symbolized the larger conflict engulfing Camelot. Despite Merlin's formidable power, Hank's resourcefulness and determination gave him the upper hand. He managed to shoot Merlin's staff, shattering it and nullifying the wizard's magical advantage. Disarmed and desperate, Merlin attempted to rally his forces for one final push, but the tide had turned. Hank's forces, bolstered by the presence of their leaders and the effectiveness of their technology, began to push the rebels back. The electric fences were repaired, and the Gatling guns resumed their relentless fire. The rebels, now leaderless and demoralized, began to falter and retreat. Victory and devastation. As night fell, the battle drew to a close. The rebels, their spirit broken, scattered and fled. Merlin, captured and defeated, was brought before King Arthur and Hank. The battlefield, now silent, was a stark reminder of the cost of the conflict. The Sand Belt, once a symbol of defense and innovation, was a grim testament to the brutality of war. Aftermath and reflection. The victory, though decisive, came at a great cost. The kingdom was deeply scarred by the battle, both physically and emotionally. The death toll was staggering, and the devastation wrought upon the land would take years to heal. Hank, standing amidst the ruins of the Sand Belt, reflected on the heavy price of progress and the immense responsibility that came with wielding such power. King Arthur, solemn and weary, addressed his people. This battle has shown us the true cost of division and the perils of clinging to the past. We must learn from this and strive for a future where innovation and tradition coexist in harmony. Merlin, stripped of his power and influence, was exiled, marking the end of an era. The surviving nobles, chastened by their defeat, pledged their loyalty to Arthur and Hank, recognizing the futility of their resistance. Rebuilding and moving forward. The aftermath of the Battle of the Sand Belt marked the beginning of a new chapter for Camelot. Hank and Arthur, united by their shared vision and the trials they had endured, set about the task of rebuilding the kingdom. The fortifications of the Sand Belt were repurposed for peaceful uses, serving as a reminder of the conflict and the resilience of the people. Hank's technological advancements continued to shape the kingdom, but with a renewed focus on inclusivity and understanding. Education and communication became paramount, ensuring that the benefits of progress were shared by all and that the mistakes of the past were not repeated. The people of Camelot, scarred by the war but hopeful for the future, embraced the new era with cautious optimism. The lessons learned from the Battle of the Sand Belt forged a stronger, more unified kingdom, where the ideals of progress, justice, and compassion guided their path forward. Conclusion. The Battle of the Sand Belt was a pivotal moment in Camelot's history, a clash of ideologies and a testament to the power of innovation and unity. Hank Morgan's leadership and technological prowess, combined with King Arthur's wisdom and valor, overcame the forces of tradition and superstition. The victory, though costly, paved the way for a brighter future, where the lessons of the past informed the progress of the present, and the promise of a better tomorrow united the people of Camelot. Chapter 11: A Pyrrhic Victory. The Battle of the Sand Belt, while marking a decisive triumph for Hank Morgan and King Arthur, left a somber shadow over Camelot. The victory had been achieved at an exorbitant price, with the kingdom in shambles and the populace deeply scarred by the ravages of war. The aftermath of the battle revealed the true cost of progress and conflict, bringing both grief and a glimmer of hope for the future. The aftermath of battle. As the first light of dawn broke over the battlefield, the full extent of the devastation became painfully clear. The once fertile plains around the sand belt were now marred by craters and littered with the bodies of the fallen. Smoke still rose from the remnants of hastily erected fortifications, and the air was thick with the acrid stench of gunpowder and blood. Hank Morgan, physically exhausted and emotionally drained, surveyed the scene with a heavy heart. The landscape, a testament to the brutal clash of ideologies, was now a graveyard for countless soldiers and knights who had fought valiantly on both sides. The weight of responsibility pressed heavily upon Hank's shoulders as he navigated the chaos, searching for survivors and offering what little comfort he could to the wounded. The toll on the kingdom. Camelot, once a beacon of hope and prosperity, lay in ruins. Villages had been razed, crops destroyed, and the infrastructure painstakingly built under Hank's guidance was now reduced to rubble. The population, already weary from the prolonged conflict, faced a grim future of rebuilding amidst their grief and loss. In the aftermath of the battle, Hank's loyal followers and the remnants of King Arthur's forces worked tirelessly to tend to the wounded and bury the dead. The camaraderie and resilience that had seen them through the darkest days of the conflict now drove them to restore some semblance of order to their shattered world. The fallen allies. The victory had come at a heavy price, with many of Hank's closest allies and friends perishing in the battle. Sir Lancelot, the brave and noble knight who had stood by Hank through thick and thin, had fallen in the heat of combat, his valor and loyalty forever etched in the annals of Camelot's history. Sir Gawain, too, had succumbed to his wounds, his indomitable spirit finally yielding to the relentless march of time. These losses weighed heavily on Hank, each fallen comrade a painful reminder of the human cost of his ambitious vision. The faces of the lost haunted his dreams, their sacrifices a poignant testament to the courage and resolve that had defined their struggle. The kingdom mourned its heroes, their legacies immortalized in the hearts and minds of the people they had fought to protect. King Arthur's final moments. The most grievous blow came with the mortal wounding of King Arthur. Struck down in the final moments of the battle, Arthur was carried from the field by his loyal knights, his life ebbing away with each passing moment. In a makeshift tent near the sand belt, Hank sat by Arthur's side, the weight of impending loss heavy in the air. Arthur, his face pale and his breath labored, reached out to Hank with a trembling hand. "Hank," he whispered, his voice barely audible above the din of the encampment, "do not let this victory be in vain. The kingdom, our people, they need your vision, your strength." Tears welled in Hank's eyes as he grasped Arthur's hand, the magnitude of the moment overwhelming him. "I will do everything I can, Arthur," he vowed, his voice choked with emotion. "I will honor your legacy and work tirelessly to build the future we dreamed of." Arthur's gaze softened, a faint smile playing on his lips. "I have faith in you, my friend. Promise me you will lead them to a better future." "I promise," Hank whispered, his voice breaking. With those final words, King Arthur, the legendary ruler who had united a kingdom and inspired countless tales of chivalry and heroism, closed his eyes for the last time. The weight of his loss settled over the camp like a shroud, the collective grief of Camelot palpable in the stillness. Heartbreak and disillusionment. In the days that followed, Hank struggled to reconcile the cost of their victory with the ideals he had fought to uphold. The kingdom lay in ruins, its people bereft and suffering, and the dream of a modern, enlightened Camelot seemed farther away than ever. The reality of progress, fraught with destruction and sacrifice, gnawed at his conscience. Hank found himself questioning the very foundations of his vision. The innovations and reforms he had championed had led to unprecedented conflict and loss. Was the price of progress too high? Had his efforts to modernize Camelot sown the seeds of its downfall? A kingdom in mourning. The mourning period for King Arthur was marked by solemn ceremonies and heartfelt tributes. People from all corners of the kingdom gathered to pay their respects, their grief a unifying force in the wake of devastation. The Knights of the Round Table, though diminished in number, vowed to uphold Arthur's legacy and support Hank in his efforts to rebuild. Hank, though burdened by his own sorrow, took up the mantle of leadership with renewed determination. He understood that the path to a brighter future was fraught with challenges and that the sacrifices of his allies and friends must not be in vain. The road to recovery. Rebuilding Camelot required a Herculean effort. Hank and his remaining allies worked tirelessly to restore the kingdom's infrastructure, ensuring that basic needs were met and that the foundations of a new society were laid. The emphasis on education, innovation, and community solidarity became the cornerstones of the recovery process. Hank's technological advancements, though initially a source of conflict, now played a crucial role in the kingdom's reconstruction. Improved agricultural techniques, advanced medical practices, and efficient communication systems helped to stabilize and revitalize the war-torn land. Hope amidst despair. Despite the overwhelming grief and devastation, glimmers of hope began to emerge. The people of Camelot, inspired by the resilience and leadership of Hank and the Knights, embraced the spirit of unity and perseverance. Communities came together to rebuild, drawing strength from their shared experiences and the memory of those who had sacrificed their lives. Hank's promise to King Arthur became the guiding light in the darkness. He dedicated himself to fulfilling the vision they had shared, working to create a society where progress and tradition coexisted harmoniously. The lessons learned from the Battle of the Sand Belt informed his approach, fostering a deeper understanding of the delicate balance between innovation and stability. Conclusion. The Battle of the Sand Belt had indeed been a Pyrrhic victory, a triumph achieved at an unimaginable cost. Yet, in the face of overwhelming loss, Hank Morgan and the people of Camelot found the strength to rebuild and move forward. The legacy of King Arthur, the bravery of the fallen knights, and the unwavering spirit of the kingdom became the bedrock upon which a new, enlightened Camelot was forged. Hank, though heartbroken and disillusioned by the destruction and loss, remained steadfast in his commitment to a better future. The journey ahead was long and fraught with challenges, but the seeds of progress had been sown, nurtured by the sacrifices of those who had believed in the dream of a brighter, more just society. The echoes of the battle, both a reminder of the past and a call to action for the future, guided Camelot towards its destiny as a beacon of hope and progress in a world forever changed by the clash of ideologies. Chapter 12. Return to the Future. Hank Morgan, the once optimistic engineer from Connecticut, now stood a broken man amidst the ruins of his dreams. The Battle of the Sand Belt had left him grief-stricken and exhausted, both physically and emotionally. The weight of the kingdom's loss and the immense cost of progress bore down on him, driving him to the edge of despair. Seeking solace, he retreated to his secret workshop, the place where he had once felt most at home, surrounded by the innovations that had defined his time in Camelot. Retreat to the workshop. The workshop, hidden deep within the fortified walls of Camelot, was a sanctuary of modernity in a medieval world. Here, Hank had spent countless hours designing and constructing devices that he believed would bring enlightenment and prosperity to the kingdom. Now, it seemed like a tomb for his shattered dreams. The hum of machinery, once a comforting sound, now only echoed the silence of his heart. Hank slumped into his chair, his body heavy with exhaustion. His eyes, bloodshot and weary, scanned the familiar surroundings. The telegraph machines, the early prototypes of electric generators, the blueprints for new inventions, all seemed to mock him with the promise of a future that had been bought at too high a price. The memories of fallen friends, the sight of King Arthur's lifeless body, and the devastated landscape of Camelot haunted his thoughts, refusing to give him peace. Succumbing to despair and fatigue. Desperation clawed at Hank's soul as he grappled with the enormity of his failure. He had envisioned a world transformed by the wonders of technology, a kingdom uplifted by the ideals of progress and reason. Instead, he had witnessed the horrors of war and the resistance of a society deeply entrenched in tradition. The duality of his existence, an agent of change in a time that resisted it, became too much to bear. Hank's mind, overwhelmed by grief and fatigue, began to drift. His eyelids grew heavy, and the relentless tide of sleep pulled him under. He sank deeper into the comforting darkness of unconsciousness, where the burdens of the world could not follow. As his breathing slowed and his mind slipped away, a strange sensation enveloped him. It was as if the very fabric of time and space were unraveling around him, pulling him through a vortex of swirling light and shadow. The mysterious transport. In this state of dreamlike detachment, Hank felt himself being lifted, as though he were weightless. The sensation was both disorienting and oddly familiar, reminiscent of the moment he had been transported to Camelot. His surroundings dissolved into a kaleidoscope of colors and sounds, a whirlwind of sensations that defied explanation. The boundaries between past and present, reality and dream, seemed to blur and merge. As abruptly as it had begun, the sensation ceased. Hank's body, heavy and real once more, came to rest on a solid surface. The air felt different, cleaner, crisper, devoid of the medieval smoke and grime he had grown accustomed to. Slowly, he opened his eyes, blinking against the harsh light that flooded his vision. He recognized the familiar ceiling of his workshop in Connecticut, the same place where his incredible journey had begun. Awakening in Connecticut. Hank struggled to his feet, his body aching from the ordeal. The modern tools and gadgets that surrounded him were both a comfort and a jarring reminder of the time he had spent in a world so different from his own. He stumbled to a nearby window and gazed out at the bustling streets of Connecticut, the noise of cars and the hum of electric lights starkly contrasting with the medieval silence he had left behind. The realization that he was back in his own time hit him with a force that took his breath away. The memories of Camelot, vivid and unrelenting, flooded his mind. He saw the faces of Arthur and his knights, the lush landscapes of a kingdom now ravaged by war, and the countless innovations he had introduced in a bid to bring about progress. These memories were not mere dreams, they were as real as the ground beneath his feet. Struggling to reconcile experiences. The return to Connecticut should have been a relief, but Hank found himself struggling to reconcile his experiences in Camelot with his modern life. The contrast between the two worlds was stark and disorienting. Here, in the present, he was surrounded by the fruits of centuries of progress, technology, infrastructure, and societal advancements that he had taken for granted before his journey. Yet, the knowledge of what he had seen and experienced in Camelot weighed heavily on him. Hank's mind was a tumult of conflicting emotions. He remembered the hope and determination that had driven him to introduce modern concepts to King Arthur's court. He recalled the initial successes and the joy of seeing the kingdom begin to flourish under his influence. But these memories were inexorably intertwined with the images of destruction, the bloodshed of the Sand Belt, and the haunting final moments of King Arthur. The haunting memories. The memories of Camelot remained vivid, as though etched into his very soul. He could not escape the faces of those he had lost, the brave knights who had become his friends, the villagers who had looked to him with hope, and the wise, noble king who had believed in his vision. Each memory was a reminder of the clash between progress and tradition, a conflict that had defined his time in the medieval world. In quiet moments, Hank would close his eyes and see the rolling hills of Camelot, hear the clang of swords in training, and smell the earthy scent of the countryside. The sense of loss was profound, for he had not only left behind a kingdom in ruins, but also a part of himself. The man who had ventured to Camelot and returned was irrevocably changed, marked by experiences that few could ever understand. A new perspective on progress. As days turned into weeks, Hank slowly began to adapt to his life in Connecticut, though he was forever altered by his journey. He returned to his work, but with a new perspective on progress and innovation. The lessons he had learned in Camelot, about the importance of balance, the human cost of rapid change, and the resilience of tradition, shaped his approach to his engineering projects. Hank became an advocate for thoughtful, inclusive progress. He understood that while technological advancements could bring about great benefits, they must be implemented with care and consideration for those who would be affected. He sought to bridge the gap between the past and the future, much like he had tried to do in Camelot, but with a newfound humility and respect for the complexities of human society. Conclusion. The return to his own time marked the end of one journey and the beginning of another. Hank Morgan, once a confident engineer driven by the promise of progress, now carried the weight of his experiences in Camelot as both a burden and a guiding light. The clash between progress and tradition that had defined his time in King Arthur's court remained a poignant reminder of the challenges inherent in shaping a better future. Hank's memories of Camelot were a testament to the enduring struggle between old and new, a narrative that echoed through the ages. As he walked the streets of Connecticut, surrounded by the trappings of modernity, he felt a deep connection to the past and a renewed commitment to forging a path forward that honored both innovation and the timeless values of humanity. Though Camelot was a world left behind, its lessons and legacy lived on within him, guiding his steps as he navigated the complexities of his own time. Hank Morgan's journey had come full circle, from the halls of King Arthur's court to the modern world, enriched by the wisdom of the past and the promise of a future shaped by thoughtful progress and enduring hope.